welcome in the name of GFFG Academy to our short video on the project lifecycle in Horizon Europe. In this presentation, we will focus on cooperative projects in Horizon Europe, so Pillar 2, which contains the 6 clusters of Horizon Europe and also the missions and partnerships sometimes. The most important funding instruments in Pillar 2 are these 3. We will start with the Research and Innovation Action. These are classical research projects focusing on development of new knowledge, of feasibility of new technologies, new products, processes, or services. This could be basic or applied research, testing, and also small prototypes. In contrast, the Innovation Actions, or IAs, are a bit closer to the market. You can also do activities for new, modified, or improved products, processes, or services, but this could go up to large-scale product validation to market replication. In contrast, coordination and support actions do not fund research and innovation activities. They contain accompanying coordination and support measures and are an important contributor to Horizon Europe, for example, by developing studies or roadmaps. So these were the most important funding instruments for Pillar 2. The conditions for participation, there's a basic standard rule, which is that you need at least 3 independent legal entities from 3 different EU member states or associated states, of which at least 1 legal entity must be from an EU member state. This is the standard rule. There are different rules for other project types, ERC, EIC, MSCA, co-fund projects, CSAs. These have different conditions for participation. So you already heard the name of associated countries. So the European Commission divides into certain country groups. First of all, the EU member states. And the next important group are the associated countries. This is a number of countries. It could be countries that are simply not members of the EU, such as Switzerland, United Kingdom, Norway. But there are also other important countries like West Balkan countries or Ukraine that have become associated. And also many countries outside Europe are by now associated. For example, Canada or New Zealand to certain parts of Horizon Europe. You should always check the latest lists to see who is by now associated. The rest of the countries are the third countries, which are again divided into 2 groups, industrialized and emerging countries and developing countries. Why is this important? It's important to see who is allowed to receive funding by Horizon Europe. EU member states, associated countries, and developing countries receive funding, and they are eligible for funding. All the others, industrialized and emerging countries, are in principle not eligible for funding, but there are certain exceptional cases where they could receive funding. For example, if you can argue that their participation is essential for the project content, or they're explicitly mentioned in the topic, or there are specific bilateral agreements. Now a bit on the intervention logic. It's important to understand where the actual call topics come from. You have the overarching 7-year program of Horizon Europe. The first important plan or strategic knowledge are the 2 strategic plans. The first one was developed 2021 to 24, and the second one for the last 3 remaining years, 25 and 27. You can find important strategic goals, overarching goals in these strategic plans, and it's an important document to read. Now to the actual calls, or for example, in the cluster, each cluster develops a work program which is further divided into destinations like thematic areas. There are several 2-year work programs and also 1-year work program 2025. In these work programs, you will then find specific calls, sometimes several calls per year. The important thing for you as an applicant are the topics, or this research topics, the call topics in the actual calls, which are the basis for your project application. But it's important to understand the intervention logic above the topics. If you look at the work programs, for example, for a cluster, you will always find an introduction to the work program, and then you will find this division into destinations, and each destination also has an introduction and so-called expected impacts. As I said, there are separate calls each year, and in the work program you will find the description of these calls, the overview table with budget for each topic, expected funding for projects, number of projects expected to be funded, and some general conditions. As an applicant, you're mostly interested in the actual topics, which always have a title, they always have specific conditions, and important to write the actual application are the two parts on the expected outcome. This describes what should be achieved from the project, and the important scope. This really describes what you should be doing in the project, and that's a very important section to follow. Mostly you will start by screening the work programs or the calls, and you find a suitable topic, and based on this topic you develop a brief project idea, and you should then develop a big project picture quite early in the process. Once you've settled on this project idea, you create a team. As I said, you mostly need at least 3 participants. You develop the project and you start writing the proposal a few months before the deadline. There's always a specific date for the deadline, and you submit electronically, and we come a bit later to what parts you have to write. The evaluation takes at most 5 months, and then you have at most 3 months to sign the actual grant agreement. Projects run for several years, mostly between 2 and 5 years. It's up to you to decide the project duration. In between, you have to do reporting, and you get certain advance and interim payments. At the end of the project, you receive a final payment. If you're writing, you will notice there are 2 parts. There's a part A, the administrative forms, and there's always a part B, the text part or the narrative. What you have to write in these parts is described in detail in the proposal templates, which you can find on the Funding and Tenders portal. Always use the latest template. Evaluation is based in general on 3 criteria. There can be exceptions, but these are the main 3 evaluation criteria: excellence, impact, and implementation. For a criterion, you have a standard threshold of at least 3 from 5 points, and you can have to reach at least 10 from 15 points overall. Who evaluates? These are in principle independent experts. You too can be an evaluator, and we advise you to register in the experts database to maybe experience what it's like to evaluate proposals. Anyone can register. This slide shows you in detail what's evaluated under each criterion. I'm not going to go into detail here, but these briefly reflect what you're writing in your proposal when you read these descriptions. The evaluation process starts with an individual evaluation by each experts. Then these experts come together, at least 3 per proposals. Check your proposal. They meet then in a consensus group and reach a common position. The results are then delivered to the panel, where the final ranking list will be put together. There are some new elements in Horizon Europe. For example, there are pilots in several calls for blind evaluation, This means anonymized short applications at the first stage in two-stage calls. There were also pilots on right to react. So basically, you have the right to put a rebuttal for your proposal. And there are also portfolio-based calls, meaning certain portfolio considerations are taken at the evaluation stage. After the evaluation, you receive an evaluation summary report, and you are either rejected or you are invited to the grant agreement preparation phase. This takes several months. As I've said, you sign the grant agreement, and then after signature, you can immediately start on the 1st of the next month, or you can also say, I would like to start in 2 or 3 months. You will then receive a pre-financing as the coordinator. As I've mentioned before on the timetable, you have to do interim reports and final reports. Sometimes certificates on financial statements are required, maybe some checks and reviews, and in the end of the funding, you receive a final payment. This was a very brief overview of the life cycle of the Horizon Europe project. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for your attention.